Alright, what's up y'all? I got a shirt in my hand. Today is the 30th of March 2025. My name is Evan Strong, the founder of In The Image Clothing Company, a clothing company where we address the human body's natural function, coming at it through the skeletal system because the fat content amount changes, the muscle mass amount changes, but our body just has a neutral within every joint within the entirety of it, and it always will only ever actually work as a whole activated. So we address clothing because it's the only thing placed onto our bodies at all times. It's the thing that has the highest potential to alter the body. And let me address the wind noise, if and when, and just any other noise, right? In the Image Clothing Company, real, raw. So here we are. At a park. I like it. I love to film videos at parks for the main side of In the Image Clothing Company. There's three sides to us as a whole. Our whole focus is keyword allowing the human body to work. We are centered around the gospel of Jesus Christ in the image of our living God. Jesus the Christ himself is who and how and through and by him is us, designed, right, in his image. So three sides to us. We have the gospel of Jesus Christ be discussed on In the Image Clothing Company podcast, aka the truth of all things. We just talk about things as they are. I get really bold, and we have really deep, thorough topics be talked about. It's really quite the place to check out, seriously. We also have In the Image Clothing Company music, where I show sizings and setups of guitars to just allow the hands to work, because the hands are essentially the shoulders. As I say, the feet are essentially the hips. The body only works all together. Now, I'll talk about real quick where clothing has to sit on everybody. Man, woman, tall, short, skinny, fat, any age, any part of the earth, any time period. It's always the same because the skeletal system will always have its only neutrals, as I was discussing. And we live on an earth with gravity pulling us straight down. There's a center line to the human being. The sternum, the spine, the trachea, the nose, our jaw stabilizes our entire body. It needs to stay in the center always. So, pants, and I will address, these ones aren't actually entirely above my hips, but that's where pants need to be. So they're all the way off the hips, not restricting their range of motion or any functionality. Right now with these pants, they're sitting a little bit on my hips, kind of like actually pretty well entirely on my hip, and it just changes the way your body works. And that's why I say that within the intros, where pants need to sit, because of reasons that I'm experiencing right now. I try to practice what I preach, or rather I preach what I have practiced, but in this case I'm practicing being somebody who's not perfect. And so, right, slightly higher in the front than the rear is the angle that the waistband of our pants has to be in, because these core muscles have to get wind noise, I understand. The core muscles have to shorten or contract to activate, and they would always just naturally work, because if there's nothing restricting the body, it'll just do its thing. Now, the seams on top of our shoulders need to be evenly behind the bones that are on the peak of our shoulders, because our shoulders only ever will work actually behind our head, because the muscle that goes from the rear of the base of the skull along the spine on the neck and then connects to the shoulder back here, that's called the upper trapezius muscle, and those only ever connect into the very base of the rear of our skull. So the shoulders only will ever actually work behind the head. Now, with button-ups, that's actually different. As far as the singular seam here isn't just one seam. Button-ups have this band of material across the back, and so that naturally just sits behind the shoulders. Ideally, the edge seams of our shoulders are right at the edges, because that's where the functionality of the shoulder is. So then there's no clashing, and the shoulders can just work, okay? Two prerequisites that we have as In the Image Clothing Company, just to further aid in no restriction, because there's not always shoelaces within the shoes that we wear, there's not always tags within the clothing we place onto us, but when there is a rope in our shoes, that's what we call a shoelace, there's only one way to weave it that's shaped the way the top of the human foot is shaped. That's what we title In the Image Clothing Company's shoelace technique, found wherever you find us on the internet in modern day, or going forth, as long as it's somewhere there to be found, okay? Secondly, we remove all tags from clothing. Anywhere a tag is placed within clothing, it's causing either a physical gap that's altering the skeletal system's only workings, and or just not allowing the musculature against that tag to activate. And in those cases, then you've got other parts of the body trying to compensate, and the body can't work within compensation. Everything just has its own function, and then it all works with everything else. So with our shoelace technique, I just didn't mention, evenly over toward the inside on both feet we tie our shoes, because that way we go to the center, right? And that's just how the feet naturally roll anyway. So this video is about keeping collars centered. I've talked about this just about more than anything else when it comes to clothing, except for just, you know, our intros, I guess. That's what I would mention the most within clothing: shoelacing technique, tags, where clothing sits. But then secondary to that, I've talked about the dreaded collar seam, as we call it, right? Within shirts, it doesn't matter what the seam really looks like, but this seam here, as we're going around the collar, that's just nice and even and just one collar. When you get to where they've put the collar together, there's a seam. This is our dreaded collar seam modification under In The Image Clothing Company. Just this little snip right there in this top band of material, just that snip right when the collar seam comes down, just that little, I call it a 1 to 2 millimeter snip because that's what it is. And what that does is allow that part of the collar to sit against the neck where it's placed. And I've actually made 3 full videos, they're each somewhere around a half hour in length, about the dreaded collar seam for In The Image Clothing Company. But I want to make this specific video just talking about collars in general, just anything going, it's fine, but I'm just gonna hold on for a second. Anything going around the neck. We have muscles going up from our shoulders, from our rib cage, from our spine. The mid and upper trapezius muscles are where collars are. There's muscles that come from the jaw down into some of these first ribs and aid in just moving the jaw and raising the shoulders and all the things that come with stabilizing the head. And our trachea, which is where food and water go through, where we breathe through, whether it is through our nose or the mouth. This is right where our collar's at. So anything that's around the neck really affects the body. The pectorals, the muscles that allow us to push, they come all the way up to here in where the collar's at. There's diaphragms in our neck as well as within our abdomen down here that allow us to breathe. And so all these things plus more that I know about that I just haven't mentioned, maybe things that I don't know about, well, probably many things that I don't know about that's going on throughout here, all will get affected, and then the entire body down to the arches in our feet, to the tips of our fingers, because the body just will have to try to work around something if there's an imbalance around its neck. The spine is right in the center, and we remove the tag that's so commonly at this time period in the rear of our collars. Okay, we remove all tags, so that one won't be there. But the dreaded collar seam is another thing to pay huge attention to. The modification in itself, what it does is it allows that part where that seam's at, that normally sits a little bit higher, it allows it to drop down. And then it's pretty nice and even, actually. It really actually does almost the fullness of what we're trying to get, which is even around the neck. So it's awesome that we're able to do that. There's so many things that come with a collar seam in them, and if it's similar to this one, our dreaded collar seam modification, shown how I just showed this one, really actually, it's huge. It's a gift. You can take a pair of scissors anywhere on the earth and do that tiny little snip, and your breathing patterns through your whole body change. Wow. Meaning stop being altered to almost a complete degree. I mean, there's still a seam there, there's still excess material, and then you place that underneath a shirt that's over it, and yes, there is still a little bit excess material, but that modification, something that I found through prayer, revelation, trial and error, as I've discussed, that's so huge. It's so absolutely, it does this to me. This is just so authentic. Like, I don't know what words to put on it, because I understand how it could be so overlooked. People might think it's not actually going to do something to have that small of a snip, but I've talked about it since the founding of In The Image Clothing Company. We will always talk about it. Anytime there's a collar seam that looks anyway, but they look just like this in so many shirts at this time period. So just keeping a collar evenly sitting around our neck, our collar bones. What happens often is stemming down at the feet, rotations through the body, zippers, buttons, drawstrings, uneven shoe tying, oversized clothing, all these things traveling up, and then the collar seam traveling down as well, and even things in hats, tags, locations that are above. This right collarbone, where it comes to the sternum, a lot of times doesn't really have motion in it. The collarbone's the bones that go from here out to here. When I talk about the shoulder seams on single seamed clothing like this, needing to sit behind, evenly behind these little bones on top of our shoulders, that's the other end of this collarbone. And so all these things I was discussing, imbalances within clothing and clothing patterns, just being right-handed as far as weights, zippers will hang on the right side, buttons will hang on the right side, tags are on the left side, which actually puts your right side out more. So many things, uneven things within clothing. The patterning that just comes from clothing designs as they are in modern day is right-handed. So this right collarbone gets so inhibited. Really, the upper trapezius over here is also, but this bone, because the human body really is about its skeletal system, when I move my arm, I'll just move my pointer finger, index finger here, as if my collarbone is my index finger, so you can see what's happening. Okay? When I'm moving my arm, it's actually this collarbone that's connecting the center of my body clear to the edge of my shoulder up here. So when you're wearing an oversized shirt, your collar isn't sitting around your neck evenly just because there's play in it. Ideally, always do what you can within any seam within a collar to let that sit just even. But if it's just too large because you're wearing just an oversized shirt, what'll happen is actually the collar can sit like this, and so it's more on this part of the collarbone where it connects to the sternum, and that will just limit the range of motion from your whole arm all the way to your fingertips, and that as well goes clear down to your foot and changes the rotations and activation within the arch of your right foot. So yeah, almost always the collar seams up on the upper left side. What that does is cause a gap more on the right side here if the collar's not centered. So two things there, right? Oversized, it's just already going to fall to the right because you're right-handed, but then the collar seam, if it's placed on the left, even if the collar's a good size and it's fitting pretty snugly as mine is here around your neck, so that ideally it's as even as we can get, still that collar seam will place any imbalance that is there just down onto where this collarbone on the right side meets the sternum. So keeping collar centered is just huge. You can look at the back of people, somebody that's wearing a shirt, and if there's a collar seam in their shirt, this is like the back of the person, let's say, right? Because this is the back of the shirt. So on the upper left side, here's that collar seam where it most commonly is. Now, when you look at people, you'll often see it kind of sitting like this. This is exaggerated, but from the left part of their shoulder, which is really that upper trapezius muscle, which is this here, that is higher than the right side. Almost always because just what the collar seam does, but also, like I said, just any play within the neck of a shirt if you're using your right hand, look at just what gravity is going to do, right? So if you look at the back of people's shirt collars, you can see it's angled. So often, if there's a collar seam, no matter what, unless they've modified it, it's going to be the case. So the upper trapezius muscle, raising, lowering the shoulder, allowing the arm to get out of the way for expansion of the rib cage, allowing the collarbone angle to be whatever it's going to be. Really, it determines that, because that's what's lifting the arm, and the arm is really that end of the collarbone, right? So having that collar sit uneven on the back of your neck will cause your shoulders to just always be like this, and that causes your spine to always be snaking side to side, causes your pelvis to change, it causes the rotations in your feet to change, and now your whole body's out of whack, even with no collar seam at all, but just if the collar of your shirt alone has moved to a place that's not centered. So keeping collars centered, that's the title of this video, because as you saw there, when I kind of took a deep breath, your shoulders will raise, and when there's something placed around your neck, if it's uneven, let's say it's falling to the right side, I'd raise my shoulders and it would be kind of like this. And so now my body would just kind of twist. If it's falling to the left more, I'd raise my shoulders and it would go like this, and my body will just twist through the entirety of it, because it's the spine that this is affecting absolutely directly, as in it's literally against it. The rear of our collar is against our spine. The back of your neck, there's pretty much nothing besides skin there between those vertebrae and your shirt collar. So muscles on opposing sides of the body, because they're opposing the center line, they have to be evenly working, okay, right in the center, and then they can just work. So it's really common for this to be happening, just an imbalance from a collar alone on a t-shirt, even one that is a solid collar, right? So this is huge, huge, and huge. Button-ups are something I love. In the Image Clothing Company clothing, we'll have button-ups be one of the items that you can purchase if and when you'd like to, when our clothing is available. As of today's date, it isn't yet. But when you button the top of a collar on a button-up shirt, what you're actually doing is, because the right side is going underneath the left, it's actually pulling this left higher, which is the same angle. Like if we follow back to the rear here, it's going to be the same angle as what I'm discussing happens just within t-shirts anyway. And sometimes, usually it's women's shirts, they'll have the buttons on the left, and the left side will actually go underneath the right. But then either way, having it right around your neck like this, it's going to just be imbalanced, because it's having tension here, pulling pretty snug, and one side's overlapping. So really it's just kind of doing this to your whole neck, and then as we've discussed of what it does to the entire body when collars aren't centered. So having that top button unbuttoned, I show this within how button-up shirts affect body mechanics. That's a video under In the Image Clothing Company that I've made. I take off the bottom button, if there is one, so that the buttons stop right at where my pant waistline starts, so that that hip hinge isn't altered. And when you sit down, then yeah, your hip hinge isn't altered. It's not rotating your hips from that bottom button that's sometimes there. And then the top button I also personally remove, at least at this time period, on the shirts that I bought, right? So we'll see how that comes about being within the Image Clothing Company clothing, because I understand wearing a tie and not wanting a gap for visual reasons, but we're doing all that we can within every design we ever put out under In the Image Clothing Company to allow the body to work, just have no restriction ideally. So having this top button unbuttoned Now when you put your head back against the rear of the collar will more evenly be against the rear of your neck, which is really directly against those upper trapezius muscles. And when it is buttoned, when you put your head back, just standing vertical, it's just going to reinforce the imbalance that's there because of what the button's doing. So keeping collars centered, that's what we'll say for this video. I'm grateful for this. I have talked about the dreaded collar seam so often, and we always will, because whether it looks exactly as it does at this time period, or if there's just a seam going around the neck at all ever, it's just an imbalance and can potentially affect all the things that I've discussed within this. And like I said, more that maybe I just haven't mentioned or don't even know about yet, okay? So there we go. We are in the Image Clothing Company. We will have clothing available when we do, made out of 100% natural materials, staying centered, fitting correct, and that's how we allow the body to work. Please just only ever purchase in the Image Clothing Company clothing if you have the intention to get it in your size. As we've discussed, just with the collar alone here, oversized clothing is so damaging to the entire body, puts us into these chronic patternings. It in itself is an imbalance. Even if the clothing is entirely design-wise centered, it will just not stay in place if there's play between our bodies and the actual clothing itself, okay? So, like I said, today is the 30th of March, 2025. Check out the other two sides of the company if you'd like to, and now you know more about keeping collars centered and how it's affecting things that maybe you don't realize, because we don't think about things a lot of the time like breathing patterns. We don't think about the other end of a bone often within any part of the body being affected by the end we're talking about, but it happens and then it travels. So yes, thank you.